The crime of use then soak in liquor. 13 young women in Dian Trang. This is a shocking criminal case in China. The number of victims in the case reached 13 people. And the way the victims were harmed was extremely tragic. Not only were their eyes removed, but their undergarments were also missing. The corpses were soaked one by one in 13 barrels of liquor in an abandoned distillery. So who was the perpetrator that acted so cruelly? Let's join confidential records to decode this mysterious case right now. On October 10, 2009, in Dian Trang village, Hongduang Commune, Bachnam District, Hebei Province, two middle-aged farmers on their way to collect firewood happened to stop by an old abandoned distillery. They entered the main workshop area, where many liquor fermentation tools still remained. Their original intention was just to find scrap wood, but as soon as they approached a row of large wooden barrels placed against the wall, they smelled a pungent stench that was distinctly different from the usual smell of liquor. Sensing something unusual, the two stopped, glanced at each other for a few seconds, then decided to open the lid of one barrel. The faint light was not enough to clearly see what was inside, but the overwhelming stench of decay made them immediately recoil. One of them shakily brought a flashlight closer and shone it inside, only to be horrified to see strands of hair and a pale white face floating in the murky mixture of liquid and residue. The first person screamed loudly in a distorted voice, while the second, trembling, pulled his friend outside. Both agreed to rush immediately to the Hongduang Commune police station. There, they reported the incident and requested authorities to quickly go to the scene. Initially skeptical, a few local police officers changed their minds upon seeing the terrified expressions of the two farmers. They called their superiors. Less than an hour later, an investigative team from Bachnam District Police was dispatched, along with an ambulance in case any victims were still alive. As investigators approached the distillery, the stench of corpses mixed with sour liquor filled the air. They quickly discovered not just one, but many large wooden barrels with loosely sealed lids. The forensic team cautiously opened each barrel. In the first barrel, a severely decomposed female corpse was found, with eye sockets hollowed out. Next was the second barrel, then the third, and on to the 13th. All contained the bodies of young women, sharing the same horrifying traits, eyes removed and no undergarments on their bodies. The color of the liquid in each barrel varied slightly, but all had a pungent, nauseating smell, part poor quality liquor, part decomposition. The lead forensic investigator initially noted that this was likely where the killer soaked the bodies. As old fermentation material bags were still scattered nearby, the perpetrator may have used the musty environment to mask the odor. Furthermore, the removal of all victims' eyes indicated the killer had extremely perverse behavior, possibly with a fetish for collecting human body parts. No one yet understood the real motive, but clearly, the level of cruelty went beyond ordinary murders. The deputy head of the investigation and forensic team began initial observations at the scene. Some of the bodies had severely decomposed, likely murdered quite a long time ago. Some barrels containing the corpses seemed more recent, but still, the exact time of death could not be immediately determined. It was highly likely that the victims had been assaulted and restrained before being deprived of their lives. Everyone realized that this was not just an ordinary case, it might have stretched on for several months, possibly even a year. Authorities cordoned off the entire facility, and surrounding areas were ordered off limits to outsiders. A large refrigerated truck was dispatched to transport 13 corpses to the Bachnam District Morgue for detailed forensic examination. On the damp concrete floor, the technical team carefully collected every fingerprint, dirt-covered footprint, strands of scattered hair, and even scratches on brick walls that appeared to be claw marks. Occasionally, they exchanged brief comments about any suspicious details, but strictly avoided disturbing the crime scene. After inspecting all the wooden barrels, forensic officers discovered many hook marks embedded at the barrel mouths, possibly used to hang or secure the lids. In a corner of the workshop were broken metal rods that seemed discarded. The entire area was thick with cobwebs and dust, clearly showing signs of long-term abandonment. The most chilling aspect was the seemingly deliberate arrangement of the barrels. They were placed close together, and faint serial numbers had even been marked on the walls. The chief of Hongduong Commune Police quickly reported the situation to Bachnam District Police and requested the formation of a special investigation team. Over the communication line, he briefly described 13 barrels, 13 girls, all missing eyes, missing underwear, identities unknown, extreme brutality. District leaders immediately ordered the deployment of investigative forces and coordination with provincial authorities. No one expected such a serious crime to occur in such a remote, rural village. An hour later, the Deputy Chief of District Police personally arrived at the scene with several seasoned investigators. They ordered a wide area lockdown and even assigned officers to guard the area overnight. There was a high possibility that the killer was still hiding nearby or had already escaped. Either way, investigators had to seize this golden window to collect evidence before the cold weather erased it all. In the air thick with the stench of corpses, the forensic team cautiously collected samples. Each body was sealed separately, with a specific ID label attached. Police took continuous photos documenting the entire layout of the scene. All 13 victims were found mutilated. Some barrels contained tattered clothing, others had only human remains submerged in fermenting liquid. A young, relatively inexperienced investigator was frozen in shock as he stared into the hollow eye sockets of a corpse. He tried to take notes. Female victim, around 20 years old, eyes slit horizontally, eyeballs missing. Nearby, the head of criminal investigations clenched his teeth and said, "Write it down, completely removed, no tools found on site. Everything proceeded under high pressure and urgency, yet professional procedures had to be maintained." After about 3 hours, the medical transport team began transferring the bodies to the morgue. 13 black body bags were neatly lined up and loaded into the truck. At Bachnam District, the forensic department operated 24/7, always ready to receive evidence samples. The head forensic examiner immediately concluded this could be a long-running serial murder case. We must find a way to analyze when exactly the victims died, how they were killed, in order to determine the period during which the killer was active. At the same time, district police immediately invited experts from Hobak province for support. Leaked information left many local residents stunned. However, the authorities only issued a limited announcement, mainly calling for cooperation in providing clues regarding missing persons in the area. Of course, no one dared to mention the horrifying details about the 13 wine barrels. Late on the night of October 10, 2009, an emergency meeting was held at the Bachnam District Police Headquarters. Numerous key officers attended, and specific assignments were made. Multiple investigation directions were raised, reviewing cases of women missing in 2008, examining traces at the winery, and learning the ownership history of the location. At the same time, a surveillance team was assigned to monitor the area to prevent additional crimes. At that moment, no one knew the identities of the victims, partly because the bodies were deformed, partly because no identification documents were found. Some questioned whether they shared a connection, studied at the same school, worked at the same company, or were trafficked. The answer had to wait for forensic results and identity verification efforts. During the meeting, the upper leadership decided to establish a special task force, and the person entrusted with the command role was team leader Luc Trio Quan, 40 years old, experienced in serious criminal cases. He and his subordinates would focus on uncovering who had turned this winery into a mass murder site. That very night, Luc Trio Quan instructed all members to pool their resources. We have 13 bodies with the same brutal method of killing. The culprit is very likely someone with knowledge of dissection, or he may have an obsession with eyes. Deploy all investigative techniques immediately. Through discussion, the forensics team promised to work around the clock to produce a preliminary report within 48 hours. The criminal investigation team planned to review traffic cameras, though they knew the locality was poor and had few surveillance devices. The The Social Security team compiled a list of young female workers, especially those under 25, to check who had gone missing without being fully reported. Investigators seriously assessed that this crime was not impulsive. The killer had arranged 13 barrels filled with mixed liquids, seemingly to preserve the corpses in his own way. What was his purpose, collecting, torturing, or performing some secret ritual? Every hypothesis was considered, as there was still no concrete evidence to narrow down the scope. Luc Trieu-Quan reminded all members are forbidden from revealing any details to outsiders. All information must remain confidential records to prevent the killer from catching wind. Everyone at the meeting nodded in agreement, fully aware that given the suspected months-long gaps in death, the perpetrator may have tracked victims elsewhere and brought them back to the winery. That late night, the district police headquarters was brightly lit. All personnel busily arranged files, notes, and evidence samples. Outside, the cold froze to the bone. But inside, the meeting room was burning with the tension of the case. The whole team determined this would be a grueling investigation. At exactly 23:45, the final order was issued. The entire winery would be guarded overnight by a police team, ready to act if the killer returned to cover their tracks. The forensic unit had to urgently perform autopsies on at least a few bodies the next day to preliminarily determine causes of death, time of death, and most importantly, how the murderer removed the victim's eyes inside the winery. The once full barrels were now empty, containing only thick residue. The stench of decomposition still lingered. The floor had blotchy rust stains and unidentified dark patches. Despite the night's darkness, the technical team continued searching for evidence, taking photographs and recording every possible detail. By early morning, news of the incident had reached the leadership of the Ha-Bak Provincial Police. A team of specialists was scheduled to come directly to assist Bac Nam District. According to plan, Luc Trieu-Quan and his team would coordinate with them to accelerate the investigation. Though there were still no concrete conclusions, it was clear that from now on, Gia Trang Hamlet would become the center of the investigation. During a brief meeting at 7:00 officers who had stayed up all night confirmed the 13 female bodies were estimated to be aged between 17 and 24, all missing eyes and underwear. Some had rope marks on their wrists. Initial theories indicated the victims had likely been confined or restrained before being killed. The remaining question, who was bold and cunning enough to cause so many disappearances without leaving clear traces? Luc Trieu-Quan reminded everyone Gia Trang Hamlet is just a few dozen minutes by motorbike from the district center. Yet no one discovered anything all this time. The killer may have come from elsewhere or exploited the abandoned winery after its former owner passed away. Today, we must find out who owned this facility, exactly when it ceased operations, and who may have frequently visited. When the sun rose, the officers split up in different directions. Some went to Hongduang Commune to review records. Others returned to the district center for forensic reports, and others went back to the winery to continue the search. By midday, Luc Trieu-Quan personally called the criminal unit to direct a review of the list of women missing in 2008. Additionally, he requested civil registry officers in neighboring communes to compile statistics on individuals who dropped out of school, ran away from home, or disappeared for no clear reason. On the morning of January 11, 2009, in the main classroom of Bac Nam District Police, all members of the special case team, together with the forensic team and several reinforced officers, continued discussions. Everyone agreed that the first priority must be identifying the victims. The forensic department was split into two groups, each performing autopsies on the 13 bodies, recording dental morphology, bone structure, unique scars, or any medical signs that could be compared with personal records. The investigative team reviewed data on women missing throughout 2008. Many records only briefly noted left home to work far away, lost contact, dropped out of school, no one knew their whereabouts. In particular, some families did not report because they thought their children got married or became factory workers elsewhere. The preliminary missing persons list may include dozens of cases, not counting those who came from other provinces. Meanwhile, the forensic team at the morgue faced numerous difficulties. Most bodies were heavily decomposed. The skin immersed in fermenting liquid had become grimy, making it difficult to identify initial injuries. However, one clear commonality emerged: the eye sockets had been cleanly cut, nearly circular around the eyelids, indicating the perpetrator had knife skills or had carried out this act multiple times. A meticulous forensic specialist washed away mud around each victim's eye sockets. He noted that the initial cuts on the first few bodies were somewhat clumsy, but became increasingly precise. This may reflect the perpetrator's learning curve or growing confidence after each crime. Additionally, the victim's underwear, bras and panties were missing, while their remaining clothes were disheveled and torn. In an adjacent room, another group separated tissue samples for DNA testing, hoping to match them against fingerprint databases. However, not everyone had prior DNA on record, making matching unlikely. The head forensic investigator recommended comparing any remaining fingerprints. Many bodies, despite damage, still had intact fingers. Though time-consuming, there was a chance to link to household registration files or ID papers submitted by workers at industrial facilities. By noon on January 11, 2009, Captain Kuong Min, in charge of matching missing person files, reported that approximately 8 women in the district had been reported missing throughout 2008. 5 others from neighboring areas had vanished, totaling 13 individuals. Their disappearance timelines ranged from early to late 2008. This list remains tentative until confirmed. A specific example, Vuong Lei, 19, of Tam Kei Town, was reported missing by her family in late February 2008. She was a recent high school graduate, planning to find work. Another case, Tran Lin, 23, a garment factory worker who went missing around March 2008. Each record told its own story, but ended the same way: unexplained disappearance. At the end of the afternoon, preliminary autopsies on 2 bodies found that, in addition to missing eyes, victims had cuts on their wrists and ankles, signs of binding. One had bruising around the neck, suggesting strangulation. Another had skull trauma, indicative of a heavy blow. Fermentation immersion complicated definitive conclusions. But forensic experts believe the restraint method likely varied with each crime. The perpetrator did not follow a fixed script, but adapted as needed. That evening, January 11, Luke Trio Kwang gathered key investigators and assigned tasks. One team would collect personal photos, medical records, and fingerprints from the families of the 13 missing women. Another would search the abandoned distillery for any overlooked objects. By the evening of January 13th, missing person files for 13 women remained incomplete. Many families confirmed the victim's appearance matched the forensic descriptions. Some said their daughters often left in the evening or suddenly said they would go to work far away. No one imagined their loved ones would end up in such a horrific situation. On January 14, 2009, the investigation team split into multiple groups to visit villages neighboring Bashnam district, including adjacent communes, to search for clues. They carried temporary ID photos of some bodies and relied on body shape, hair, or remaining clothing. This approach was complex due to facial deformation, but police still hoped residents had seen them before they disappeared. In Tam Kei Town, Captain Kuong Min's team investigated a low-cost boarding house frequently occupied by migrant workers. The landlord vaguely recalled a few young women renting for a few weeks before moving on, but no detailed records remained. An elderly woman said, "I remember a young woman, about 20, named Vuong Lei, who disappeared suddenly at the end of February last year and didn't say where she was going. When asked for more detail, she provided nothing helpful." Simultaneously, another team went to a small eastern industrial zone with garment, wood, and mechanical workshops at Fukan Garment Factory. The manager confirmed that Tran Lin, 23, worked there but quit in March 2008. Her listed home was in Vin Tai Hamlet, about 15 kilometers away. The manager did not know why she quit. She disappeared without collecting her salary When asked if she had been seen with strangers, some workers hesitated, recalling that she spoke with a tall, thin man who sometimes waited at the gate, but no one paid much attention since many people came and went. At the Confidential Records Office, investigators worked to categorize information from the 13 missing persons' families. One common trait emerged: most victims were young laborers aged 17, 24, facing economic hardships, or recent graduates without stable jobs. They were vulnerable to false promises of easy work, high pay, or, due to circumstances, went to work far away without supervision. Police concluded the perpetrator likely approached victims in secluded places or lured them via fake job ads. After restraint, he took them to the abandoned distillery and committed brutal crimes. Investigators questioned whether he had accomplices or transportation means if victims came from afar. He must have had a way to move them. On the afternoon of January 15th, the criminal team pieced together clues. They hypothesized that since the women disappeared from various locations, the perpetrator either owned a car or small truck, or used public transport and a drugging ploy. All possibilities remained uncertain. Forensic analysts continued to study the differing times of death for the 13 bodies. Interim results suggested the murders occurred in waves, some early 2008, more mid-year, and final victims late 2008. This meant the killer operated freely throughout 2008 without detection. On January 16th, the team invited more witnesses who had worked at the distillery when the former owner was alive. They learned the previous owner, Mr. Wang Chi-tai, died suddenly mid-2007, after which the distillery closed. Some people came to clean up but never officially took over. No new alcohol production was seen. Dien Trang village was sparsely populated and overlooked. A former worker, Dieu Bin, said, "I left right after Mr. Huang died. I never returned. A few barrels of unfinished brew remained, but who would go there?" On January 17th, the surveillance team returned to Hongduong Commune to inquire about nocturnal activity at the distillery. Locals reported occasional sneaking trips at night, but assumed they were petty thieves or curious youths, without clear identification. That evening, an investigator remarked, "Whenever we ask, villagers give vague answers, no specifics. The perpetrator may be using this confusion to hide. He probably chose the distillery because people don't dare go there." This deduction led Confidential Records to admit they were still passive, with no solid leads towards suspects. On January 18th, forensics reported a new finding among the 13 victims. One apparently died latest around late December 2008, evidenced by less decomposition and relatively intact soft tissue. The precise circular cuts around the eyes indicated high precision and likely skill. Initial experts suspect the perpetrator had basic medical knowledge or a history in butchery. That evening, Luc Trio-Quan introduced a new investigation direction. He ordered reviewing medical staff records, doctors, nurses, or anyone involved in animal dissection in the area, reasoning that most people cannot surgically remove eyes so neatly. The Confidential Records team also gathered lists of abattoir workers, livestock farm owners, and professional meat vendors, all potential suspects. With the new approach, investigators urgently contacted the district labor office and surrounding areas to identify anyone currently engaged in pig or cattle slaughtering, or who had studied medicine but dropped out. Although it was just a hypothesis, it opened a more specific avenue instead of aimless searching. On the morning of January 19, those in charge of the list reported a number of individuals with experience in butchering, but they were widely scattered. Screening each person would take a lot of time, but it could not be overlooked because among them, the culprit might be hiding. Additionally, there was the possibility of an anonymous gangster without a clear occupational record. That same afternoon, the reconnaissance team received information from local police. There had once been a middle-aged man with butchering experience who worked as a seasonal laborer at the old distillery. He had left in 2007. His name was Lu Kwong, about 48 years old, and no one knew where he was now. This lead was immediately brought to the investigation table. Although not yet confirmed, Lu Kwong became the first name officially listed as a suspect. On the evening of January 20th, Luke Trio-Kwan ordered further investigation into Lu Kuang and requested a reconnaissance team be sent to the place where he used to live. The goal was to determine whether he had returned to the distillery after 2007. At the same time, the forensic team continued dissecting the remaining bodies in hopes of completing the report soon. On January 21, 2009, at the main meeting room of Bac Nam District Police, an emergency meeting was held, focusing on the name Lu Kuang, 48 years old, formerly employed at the old distillery. His record revealed unusual details. He left the district at the end of 2007 and left no specific address. Although there was no solid evidence, the Confidential Records Task Force decided to focus on verifying, as the possibility of Lu Kuang using his butchering experience to commit the crime could not be ruled out. During the meeting, Luke Trio-Kwan ordered the deployment of 3 reconnaissance teams. The first group was to go to the town where Lu Kuang once lived. The second, to check the list of livestock slaughterhouses and veterinary clinics for leads. The last team was to visit every lodging facility in the surrounding areas to screen for anyone matching Lu Kuang's description. Once the plan was finalized, everyone quickly departed to avoid wasting time. That same afternoon, the first team went to the old riverside lodging area where Lu Kuang was believed to have stayed. The landlord confirmed that he appeared in the early months of 2007, often left early and returned late, and was not friendly with neighbors. At the end of 2007, he left, saying he would go to another province to look for work. The landlord didn't recall many details, only mentioning that Lu Kuang once brought along a set of livestock butchering knives wrapped in cloth. On the morning of January 22nd, the second team investigated pig, chicken, and cattle slaughterhouses in the district. Some owners said they had heard of Lu Kuang, but he only worked short-term and then disappeared. Some described him as unsociable. He took his pay and left, leaving neither good nor bad impressions. However, many confirmed that he was highly skilled in butchering. Police documented all the statements, though there were no clear breakthroughs yet. On January 23rd, the third team submitted a report. Most of the local guest houses and budget hotels had no record of any guest named Lu Kuang in the past year. They also hadn't seen anyone matching the old photo provided by the police. Luke Trio-Kwan ordered an expansion of the search to neighboring provinces, as a real perpetrator would likely hide carefully. Later that day, internal information arrived from a commune police unit on the outskirts. Someone claimed to have seen a middle-aged man resembling Lu Kuang in a field north of the distillery at the end of 2008. However, the witness wasn't certain, as it was dusk. They only saw a short man, roughly in his 40s and carrying a heavy bag. This vague tip was noted but could not yet be verified. By January 24th, the Confidential Records team convened to assess progress. No one had found convincing evidence that Lu Kuang returned to the distillery in 2008. The lead forensic examiner separated the bodies that showed the most precise eye removal techniques for focused analysis. He discovered an unusual detail on a small bone in the last victim's finger, a superfine saw mark, suggesting the killer used a specialized blade. This could be consistent with butchering skills. The Confidential Records Task Force immediately took note and began exploring the lead involving surgical tools from agricultural supply stores, medical outlets, or the black market. On the afternoon of January 25th, a police team delved deeper into the distillery's history. They checked documents related to taxes, insurance, and utility bills, and discovered that after Mr. Huang's death, no one had paid the bills. However, at least twice, someone using a fake name made small payments to keep the electricity running. On the morning of January 26, with pressure mounting and leads still stagnant, the investigators considered approaching Lu Kuang's family. An officer was dispatched to his hometown in another province, hoping to meet relatives or anyone in contact with him. However, the callback reported that even his family did not know his whereabouts since the end of 2007, as he had virtually cut off all communication. On January 27th, the police entered a broad screening phase. They compiled a list of veterinarians, pig butchers, and those who had studied medicine but were not practicing officially. This list was quite long and required individual verification. The investigators traveled constantly, knocking on doors, asking questions, and checking documents. On January 28th, a new detail emerged. When the forensic team first analyzed the victim's clothing, they found a patch of unfinished stitching with a label from an illegal garment factory that had been shut down. That factory was about 10 kilometers from the distillery. When contacted, the local authorities said that factory had been rented short-term by a former owner and then abandoned around early 2008. It was still unknown whether this was connected to the case, but the information was recorded. Near the evening of January 29th, S.o.a.k.i.ng consolidated all the data to map out the next steps, trace Lu Kuang, screen all suspects under 45 years old with butchering skills, investigate the background of the illegal garment factory once operating near the distillery. He believed that one of these three directions could lead to a breakthrough or at least point to a trail leading to the killer. On the morning of January 30th, the reconnaissance team returned to Jiantrang village to question residents living near the distillery. One resident said they had seen a fairly young man, around 30 years old, enter the distillery on a night in June 2008. He was carrying a styrofoam box and hurriedly slipped through the back door. That same afternoon, the confidential records unit requested confirmation of the witness's description. They stated that the young man was about 1.70 to 1.75 meters tall, slim, and wearing a mask. The lighting was unclear, and the person who saw him only caught a glimpse. Nevertheless, this was the first time a description was given of someone under 45 entering the distillery during the time when victims were being murdered one after another. The investigation shifted in another direction while still maintaining pressure to find Lu Kuang. On February 1st, 2009, the confidential records team entered the phase of expanded investigation. Previous reports showed that the suspect might not only be Lu Kuang. Still, the search for him was being conducted in parallel. Two police teams left Bachnam district for Shijiazhuang City, the capital of Hebei province, to further examine residency records and seasonal labor ties there. The first group began searching through temporary housing for migrant workers. They inquired around areas concentrated with livestock butchers, farmers, and even asked truck drivers who transported meat. No one knew exactly where Lu Kuang was. Some said they had met someone named Kuang, but the age and physical features didn't match. In reality, the city had many migrants, and checking every person wasn't simple. Meanwhile, the second group went to hospitals, clinics, and medical schools to inspect records of staff or students who had dropped out. They filtered for those related to surgery or anatomy, which was the new lead concerning someone capable of removing eyes skillfully. However, most of the files didn't mention any suspicious person under 45 who had suddenly quit in 2008. The initial results were rather unclear. On the evening of February 2nd, S.o.a.k.i.ng received a message from the forensic team. They compared a few hair samples found at the distillery with those of the victims, but one reddish-brown strand did not match any. It was highly likely to belong to the perpetrator or someone connected. Upon testing, the strand showed signs of dying, had a firm root, and it was difficult to determine when it had fallen out, just that it wasn't natural. This was a scattered clue, but at least it confirmed that someone else, possibly female or a dyed-hair individual, had been in the distillery. On February 3rd, a new development emerged. Technicians discovered a fingerprint on an old metal bar in a corner of the distillery. They used chemical restoration methods and compared it to Lu Kuang's fingerprints stored in the system. No match. So who was the owner of this mysterious fingerprint? This raised further suspicion toward the young man the witness had seen. That same afternoon, a police officer received news from a medical records archive. Around 2002, a young man named Tao Juk Quan had participated in a basic nursing course organized by a local health station. He was born in 1972, making him about 37 years old, under the 45-year-old suspect profile. His medical knowledge could explain the precise cutting technique if he was involved. Additionally, Tao Juk Kwan appeared on a list of people who trained others in livestock slaughter at a small workshop on the outskirts of Shijiazhuang. This was information the confidential records team had never reviewed. Once they got the name Tao Juk Kwan, Luke Trio, Kwan immediately ordered a background check. Initial findings showed he was from an agricultural district, dropped out after middle school, and worked various jobs: butcher, food factory worker, and so on. He had no clear criminal record, but his ID file showed he frequently moved between areas around Hebei. On the evening of February 4th, an investigator went to collect information about Tao Juk Kwan at an industrial zone near Shijiazhuang. The slaughterhouse owner recalled hiring Tao Juk Kwan in early 2008 to help train staff in animal butchering. He stayed about 3 months and then left without notice. The owner said he was skillful, very neat in his cuts, and never socialized. Eventually, he quit without saying why. When asked for details, the owner confirmed Tao Juk Kwan left the slaughterhouse around late March 2008, coinciding with the time at least 2 victims had been murdered. Police suspected he could have moved from one area to another seeking prey, but there was no evidence yet linking him directly to the distillery. Luke Trio Kwan ordered continued investigation into his whereabouts after March 2008. On February 5th, a new detail emerged. The slaughterhouse owner recalled that once, Tao Juk Kwan had brought along a large, older man to demonstrate slaughtering techniques. This man vaguely resembled the descriptions of Lu Kwong. The two spoke together, then disappeared, and no one knew what they did afterward. Upon hearing this, the Confidential Records Unit immediately formed a hypothesis. Could there be a connection between Tao Juk Kwan and Lu Tuong, or was it just a random meeting? That same afternoon, officers reconnected with former slaughterhouse workers. They confirmed that Tao Juk Kwan had shown excessive fascination with dissection, sometimes even studying how to remove animal eyes. A worker named Martin revealed, "He kept talking about the beauty of the eye. I found it creepy, but figured it was just some job-related obsession, so I didn't think much of it." On February 6th, Luke Trio Kwan convened a meeting. Tao Juk Kwan, 37 years old, skilled in dissection. Once seen with Lu Kwong, we need to focus the investigation on this man. The criminal unit mobilized immediately. They traced Tao Juk Kwan's ID number and found that he hadn't registered residence anywhere since June 2008, another mystery. He didn't appear on any payroll at any business since then. In the following days, the investigation team tracked down every trace Tao Juk Kwan had left. They visited his hometown to question relatives, who said he rarely returned and had been wandering for years. A cousin said Tao Juk Kwan left home in his teens, constantly changed jobs, and seldom contacted the family. They had no phone number or specific address for him. On February 7, the reconnaissance team inspected an area on the outskirts of Shijiazhuang, where Tao Juk Kwan had supposedly stayed. The landlord described him as very secretive and often going out at night. Luke Trio Kwan immediately issued a wanted alert for Tao Juk Kwan, identifying him as the prime suspect. The request was sent to local police forces, emphasizing that he could be connected to 13 brutal murders. Meanwhile, the search for Lu Kwong continued, as collaboration or conflict between the two hadn't been ruled out. At noon on February 10th, a scout from Bashnam district reported that someone had seen Tao Juk Kwan at the edge of Jiantrang village around June 2008. He was carrying a backpack and looked tense when asked casually. Tao Juk Kwan said he was looking for work, then disappeared. This detail matched earlier accounts of a stranger seen near the distillery one night. On the morning of February 11, Luke Trio Kwan ordered scouts to sweep the villages surrounding the distillery and interview residents. The goal: find anyone who had seen Tao Juk Kwan in 2008. Some young people said they saw a stranger at a roadside food stall but couldn't make out his face as he always wore a cap. These scattered pieces of information gradually connected, confirming that Tao Juk Kwan appeared sporadically and never stayed in one place for long. On February 12th, the Confidential Records Unit received a cooperation request from provincial police. They wanted to expand the search range for Tao Juk Kwan and check all bus and train stations. At the same time, a plan was launched to monitor forested areas' potential hiding places for the suspect. Anyone who had interacted with him was summoned for statements. Most said they had only met him briefly and didn't know where he was living. On February 14, Luke Trio Kwan made an announcement to the entire team. We now have solid suspicion against Tao Juk Kwan. He's the suspect to be urgently captured. Any sightings must be reported immediately. But stay alert, he likely knows the terrain and may be ready to kill again. On February 15, 2009, when Plan B began implementation, 2 police units spread out to critical locations along the provincial borders. One team went to a district bordering Henan province, the other to the border between Hebei and Shaanxi. Their sole mission to track down Tao Juk Kwan, the suspect believed to be the mastermind behind the series of murders at the liquor factory. That same afternoon, a temporary checkpoint reported seeing a thin man wearing a hat traveling by interprovincial coach through the territory of Henan province. Characteristics: his face was hard to identify because he was wearing a mask. Police immediately tracked the bus route but lost the trail right at the provincial border. This faint clue prompted the teams to expand their search area and coordinate with the Henan police force. On February 16, a team of investigators stopped in a small town near the border of Hebei and Henan. They questioned locals about any strangers who had rented a room. A rice shop owner said a middle-aged man in shabby clothing, carrying a small knife, had stopped by to eat on February 14th. The man's height, gait, and voice resembled Tao Juk Kwan, but his age was hard to determine. Was he in disguise? The Confidential Records team took note and hurried off in search of the next lead. On February 18, the surveillance team in S.o.a.k.i.ng reported a hunter in the forest said he had seen a strange man standing still, staring from afar, then running away. The hunter described the man as thin, with a gaunt face, appearing to be over 30 years old and wearing a dark brown jacket. It was uncertain whether this was Tao Juk Kwan, but the police still dispatched forces to scour the forest paths, bringing along experienced tracking dogs. On February 19, the report showed no suspects had been captured. It was likely that Tao Juk Kwan knew how to avoid checkpoints. He might change his clothing frequently, move through adjacent provinces, or hide in mountainous forest areas. The search force could not spread too thin, but also lacked the numbers to thoroughly block every path. Meanwhile, the forensic team discovered an unusual piece of fabric tightly stuck to the lid of a liquor barrel. It appeared to be from a bag. Microscopic fiber analysis revealed it was made from a rare type of material, typically used for waterproof backpacks often sold in wholesale markets. After questioning local vendors, the police found that this type of backpack was common among freelance laborers, cheap but durable. This detail partly confirmed that the killer had brought specific tools and may have cut out the eyes right at the factory before soaking the bodies. On February 20th, a witness in the border area between Hebei and S.o.a.k.i.ng reported having seen a man seemingly hiding behind a rock wall, looking anxious. The witness said the man had a shoulder bag. When approached, he silently turned away and left. Suspecting this was Tao Juk Kwan, the police conducted a day-long search but ultimately didn't find him. Worn footprints led into a mountain path and then vanished. Everything seemed to mock their efforts. By February 21st, the manhunt had yielded no positive results. Luke Trio Kwan encouraged the team, "He can't hide forever. We just need to track his movement routes. Someone being hunted this intensely will surely run out of food and money." Each team continued following any information with strict orders to report any sightings immediately. He must not escape. February 22nd, an unexpected detail emerged. Someone provided a lead about an abandoned house near the western edge of Bachnam District Forest. The place had been left behind by a family and previously listed for sale but never sold. Police sent 2 investigators to inspect it. Inside, they found new signs: a still warm pile of ashes, scattered instant noodle wrappers, and a water bottle indicating someone had just left recently. That same evening, the confidential records team expanded their inspection of all nearby paths, assuming Tao Juk Kwan was wandering the forest. They set up ambushes at several exits to prevent him from slipping through. However, the rugged terrain, dense foliage, limited visibility, and the onset of nightfall made everything more difficult. On February 23rd, a surveillance team persisted in their search. Following a trail, they found a torn piece of fabric snagged on a thorn bush. Upon comparison, it matched the type used for waterproof backpacks. This confirmed that the suspect had been moving through the forest. Tracking dogs led the police several kilometers deeper, but then lost the scent due to strong winds and multiple forks in the terrain. On February 24th, reinforcements from the provincial police arrived. They closely coordinated with the Bachnam District Criminal Unit, dividing the forest into sections for systematic searches. The operation continued into the afternoon without locating Tao Juk Kwan. Some investigators speculated that he had taken advantage of nightfall to cross into another province, or perhaps he was hiding in a rock cave. Late at night, on February 25th, news came from Hanam. Province traffic police had previously seen someone resembling Tao Juk Kwan board a long-distance coach heading west. The arrest team immediately coordinated with other provinces to continue the pursuit. However, when they checked the bus terminal, he was nowhere to be found. The trail went cold there. On February 26, Luke Trio Kwan ordered the launch of a new investigative direction. Tao Juk Kwan was successfully evading capture because he understood the patterns of the police checkpoints. He deliberately chose narrow trails, frequently changed his clothes, and acted quickly. There was no other option but to persistently expand inspections. For several consecutive days, there was still no news. On February 27th, the surveillance team stationed in a town across the border overheard rumors about a man carrying a knife who slept on the street at night and disappeared early in the morning. When they inquired further, the locals couldn't describe his appearance. Everything seemed to go in circles. Many officers admitted this was the most difficult manhunt they had ever faced. The culprit was taking advantage of the vast rural terrain, his adaptability, and his heightened caution after hearing the police were pursuing him. On February 28th, an unexpected incident occurred. The Sun Tai Provincial Police sent a notification about a public disturbance in a small town. The suspect, temporarily detained, was named Lu Kwong, 48 years old. Suspected of assault, upon receiving the news, Luke Trio Kwan ordered that Lu Kwong be urgently transferred to Bachnam for interrogation related to the case of the 13 wine barrels. On the morning of March 1st, Lu Kwong was brought to the district police headquarters. He appeared panicked, constantly proclaiming his innocence, insisting he had nothing to do with the murders. During the interrogation, Lu Chuang stated he had only met Tao Juk Kwan once, back in early 2008 when a sausage factory had invited them to provide technical guidance. After that, they went their separate ways. Lu Chuang admitted he used to know the old liquor factory but claimed he had never returned since Mr. Huang passed away. The investigators pressed him about the notebook labeled LC. Lu Kwong said it might have been a notebook he left behind while packing up his belongings at the liquor factory at the end of 2007. He said he had no idea if someone else added notes or intentionally tried to smear him. His statements partially aligned with the suspicion that Tao Juk Kwan used LC as a decoy to mislead investigators. The interrogation concluded at the end of March 1st. Lu Kwong was not held for long, as there was no evidence to prove he had returned to the factory in 2008. Naturally, his file was kept for monitoring. The police force then fully refocused on the mission to capture Tao Juk Kwan. In the the early morning of March 1st, 2009, a police unit headed northwest of Bac district, an area with complex terrain, forests interspersed with farmlands. They were equipped with detailed maps and divided into teams of 3 to 4 members to patrol each section. There were sparse households scattered across the region. When asked, most residents said they had no knowledge of any strangers hiding nearby. A few claimed to have seen a man wearing a hat and a face mask, but the sightings were several days earlier, making it uncertain whether it was Tao Juk Kwan. The leads remained vague. On March 2nd, another surveillance team coordinated with the commune police along the Hongduong River, inspecting ferries and temporary docks. They pursued the theory that Tao Juk Kwan might have used a small boat to cross the river and escape to another area. The ferry operators said that passengers came sporadically, and none matched the description. Many unfamiliar faces appeared during this season, mostly traders, and no one resembled the alleged murderer. Although disappointed, the task force remained persistent because just a small slip could allow him to escape. On March 3rd, a report came in from Bialang commune. A household discovered their vegetable garden had been disturbed by rats the previous night. Several footprints, about size 42, were found on the moist soil, along with scattered cigarette butts. Police arrived immediately. Comparing the shoe size with the data collected at the distillery, the footprints at the factory earlier were also around size 42 with a fairly common sole type. This was not enough to confirm the suspect was Tao Juk Kwan. However, the criminal investigation team still set up an observation perimeter throughout the surrounding area, hoping to capture the intruder. The result? No trace of him. On March 5th, the district police received information that a farmer at the foot of Tin La Mountain had lost a goat during the night. The cut on the goat's neck was very clean, resembling the work of someone skilled in slaughtering livestock. The incident occurred not far from the forested area where Tao Juk Kwan was believed to be hiding. The police immediately dispatched a 6-person team with sniffer dogs to search the surroundings. They found a blood trail that slid and then abruptly ended at a stream, likely one that had fish. The suspect had likely killed the goat for food. This detail further convinced everyone that Tao Juk Kwan was hiding in the mountains, surviving by stealing food and small livestock. All roads in the area were placed under tighter surveillance. On March 7th, 3 scouts climbing the western ridge of the mountain discovered a makeshift campfire spot. Nearby were scraps of goat bones partially grilled and wrapped in paper. Although the fire was out, traces of burnt fat were still visible. One person lifted a layer of hidden stones and pulled out several thin ropes. Everything was sealed and sent back for analysis. In the meeting that afternoon, Luc Trio Kwan concluded that it was highly likely Tao Juk Kwan had created a small shelter on the mountain and moved around frequently whenever he sensed danger. No one knew whether he carried firearms or just knives, so everyone approaching had to be extremely cautious. On March 9th, news from Sun Tai province reported a suspicious man who tried to break into an agricultural supply warehouse but was spotted by local guards and fled into the forest. This person wore a brown jacket, a black scarf, and his face wasn't clearly seen. He seemed to be carrying a bag. Sun Tai police pursued him but lost the trail on a deserted path. They contacted Bac Nam district police, noting that the description matched about 80% with Tao Juk Kwan. This raised concerns that he was moving across provinces, making coordination more difficult. On March 12th, the investigation team returned to the old distillery to research the area in hopes of finding missed clues. They used a metal detector to scan the floor and discovered a rusty lock thrown in a dark corner. The serial number was no longer visible. A technical specialist deduced it might have been a lock used to secure a barrel lid, but most of the barrels had been sealed with hooks. So whose lock was this? The conclusion was unclear, just another item added to the records. On March 15th, a mountain resident reported that a stranger had broken into their field shack, stealing a knife, some rice, and a box of matches. The homeowner couldn't stop him and only saw his back fleeing. Comparing the description, police noted that the stranger was tall and thin, wearing dark pants. They followed the footprints to a hillside where the grass was trampled, but the trail ended. The perimeter was expanded and 10 more checkpoints were added, but the forest was vast with many shortcuts. The suspect moved quickly, leaving no fingerprints on wooden items. The pursuit was intense, but still yielded no results. On March 18th, the confidential records team concluded from early March until now. Several petty thefts had occurred in the mountain region, mostly involving food, knives, or thin blankets, all sharing similar characteristics, likely the work of one individual. Gouged was the prime suspect, given his demonstrated survival skills and calmness when handling victims. Everyone agreed to reinforce the team, even requesting superior officers to add more sniffer dogs trained to track blood. S.o.a.k.i.ng personally commanded, dividing the forces into arc-shaped squads, waiting for a chance to corner the suspect. On March 20th, an investigator received a tip from residents in S.o.a.k.i.ng commune. They said that last night there had been strange noises behind their agricultural storage shed. Upon inspection, they saw a man carrying a large bag rummaging through things. When spotted, he fled, briefly revealing a thin face, matted hair, and deep-set eyes. Although the witness couldn't describe him in detail, they guessed he was in his 30s. Police arrived to search and found a piece of cloth near a puddle. A quick analysis showed the fabric matched a type of water-resistant backpack previously mentioned by forensic experts. The evidence was clear this suspect was continually acquiring more supplies. On March 22nd, the reconnaissance team staked out a footpath in S.o.a.k.i.ng for 2 consecutive nights, hoping to catch the suspect in the act. However, no one showed up. It seemed Gouged always moved as soon as he sensed surveillance. Although the forest was not endless, he still had enough tricks to evade detection. At one point, the team thought they had him cornered, but he slipped through the trees and vanished again. On March 25th, to tighten the search, the district police decided to coordinate with the militia in nearby villages. Some households volunteered to help, offering food to support the manhunt. They organized night patrol. If signs of intrusion were detected, they would immediately signal with lights. This method reduced the risk of further thefts. Though some minor incidents still occurred, police quickly arrived to collect evidence. Every detail pointed to the same perpetrator. On March 29th, S.o.a.k.i.ng reviewed the file's shoe prints, backpack fabric, the stolen goat, the break-in at the farm shed, the cigarette butts. Most victims described the suspect as thin, with wild eyes. He affirmed, "It's him." We must persist. Everyone complied strictly. Though time-consuming, they did not want to overlook a single clue. On April 2nd, the forest reconnaissance team reported that they found a dry stream with traces of a fire. Up on the bank, a patch of soil had been dug up, revealing animal bones and crumpled plastic bags. Police examined a faint shoe print near the stream, about 27 centimeters long, size 42. They followed the path through a ravine to a high rocky cliff lined with tall reeds. Inside the cliff wall was a large crevice empty. The suspect had likely sheltered there but had moved on. On April 5th, Tin Lam Commune police reported that a man was seen wandering, carrying a knife, and asking for water at a household at dusk. The homeowner was scared and didn't ask much. The man had a haggard face and looked in his 30s. Before they could report him, he had left. A group of investigators arrived and scoured the area through the night. This time, they found a patch of trampled grass and deep footprints heading east. The trail ended at a slippery rock slope. The suspect disappeared. Everyone was frustrated, knowing that just a few minutes earlier, they might have caught him. On April 7, to speed things up, S.o.a.k.i.ng added a new plan to plant undercover agents disguised as travelers to lure the suspect in places he might visit for food. 2 officers dressed as a farming couple and temporarily stayed in a small hut near the forest. They prepared food, flashlights, and alarm traps. After 3 nights of waiting, no one came. At dawn on April 10th, they heard a strange noise behind the hut. They turned on the lights and rushed out, only to see a shadow fleeing. This time, the suspect left footprints in the mud, with tread marks nearly identical to those previously collected. The whole team chased him through the forest for nearly 2 kilometers before losing him. Although they didn't catch him, it was clear the suspect was now panicked, forced to constantly relocate. On April 12th, an elderly villager in a nearby hamlet revealed that he had a brief conversation with a stranger. He described the man as asking for a light to smoke, with a hoarse voice and no name given. When the old man asked, "Where are you from?" the man shot him a glare and walked away. Watching him leave, the homeowner noticed the man had a sagging, muddy backpack. This image fully matched the description of S.o.a.k.i.ng. When police came to follow up, the old man only remembered that the stranger had headed toward a dry stream. The search team followed and found the carcass of a wild dog with its belly cut open, its meat taken. The suspect seemed desperate, willing to kill any animal to survive. On April 15th, Bachnam District Police coordinated with several checkpoints in Songhai Province to establish a second ring of control. Every vehicle coming out of the forest was strictly inspected. Days passed with no sign of S.o.a.k.i.ng. One theory suggested he traveled on foot through forest trails, avoiding all major roads or perhaps hitching rides on private motorcycles. Luke Trieu Quan reiterated, "He's likely been clinging to this area for a long time. There's no way he slipped past everyone. We need to tighten the checkpoints even further." On April 18th, the search team discovered a piece of brown jacket caught on a tree branch. Comparing it with the type of coat the suspect was last seen wearing, it was nearly identical. The location was about an hour's walk from the mountain base. On the ground, broken branches indicated someone had hurried through. Following the path against the wind, police reached a bush near a dry canal. The footprints were interwoven but ended abruptly at a patch of hard soil, no further trace. The team fanned out again without success. On April 20th, a confidential records team, in coordination with forest rangers, attempted to tighten the net in the forest. They stationed personnel in hidden access points and set up long-range lights. After 3 nights, no activity was reported. On the morning of April 23rd, a ranger reported discovering a fresh animal skeleton inside a narrow rock cave. The location was fairly secluded, possibly used as a shelter. Upon inspection, the confidential records team found torn clothing, many dried bloodstains, and a trail indicating that someone had dragged a heavy object. All signs suggested that the suspect had been hiding in the area for at least several days before moving on. On April 25th, internal sources leaked that S.o.a.k.i.ng might have grown weary of the harsh conditions of hiding and was planning to cross the border into the Binh Nguyen region. The arrest team feared that he might suddenly appear and harm civilians in a moment of desperation. In response, they reinforced control checkpoints and discreetly installed additional warning signs in the village. Several households were instructed on how to identify and signal if they saw a suspicious person. On April 27th, a scout received a call from Hongduang Commune Police. Someone had just been robbed of an old bicycle right at the road leading into the mountains. The victim reported that the robber was wearing a backpack, holding a knife, had sunken eyes, and appeared to be in his 30s. The man sped off on the bicycle. Several scouts immediately gave chase and, at a sharp bend in a deserted area, found the abandoned bicycle with a flat tire due to lack of air. The suspect was nowhere to be seen. He had likely continued on foot. This incident raised the alert level as S.o.a.k.i.ng had shifted from petty theft to armed robbery. On April 29th, the Special Investigation Unit solidified its assessment. The suspect was showing increasingly aggressive behavior and was willing to use violence to escape. He had been on the run for nearly 2 months, with no signs of leaving the area entirely. While all roads were manned with checkpoints, the mountainous terrain still gave him an advantage. Luke Trieu declared with determination, "We cannot allow him to keep hiding indefinitely. With any luck, he will eventually make a mistake." On April 30th, police forces were deployed in denser formations along the Ha-Bak-Son-Thai border. Everyone traveling through was required to show identification and undergo face checks. Several individuals were temporarily detained for carrying weapons, but none were Tao-juk Kwan. Although he had not yet been caught, the increasing frequency of clues about a mysterious man indicated that the noose was tightening. On May 1, 2009, after many nights of unsuccessful tracking, the Confidential Records Unit decided to change tactics. They intensified the vetting of temporary residents in towns near the mountains and focused on abandoned plots on the outskirts of Bac Nam district. Luke Trio Kwan reiterated the need to carefully inspect every abandoned household, empty livestock shed, and unfinished construction, anything that could show signs of hidden habitation. On May 2nd, a special task force led by Lieutenant Meng Wong headed into the forest. They brought in sniffer dogs newly deployed from another province. After half a day's march, the dogs began circling a temporary wooden ranger shack. Inside, stains were visible on the wooden floor, possibly old blood. Upon searching, they found a few greasy food wrappers and cigarette butts. Quick analysis revealed the cigarettes were a cheap brand typically sold at rural stores. Everything was sealed and sent back to the Criminal Investigations team. On May 3rd, commune police reported that at a market fair near the mountain range, a strange man had asked to buy rice. The stall owner described him as thin, wearing dirty clothes, approximately 1.70 meters tall or a bit more, but he left the booth quickly. No one managed to note further details. Authorities suspected that Tao-juk Kwan had mingled with the crowd to purchase food and then retreated back into the forest. Orders were issued to patrol market fairs in the following days, but no target matching the description was found. On May 4th, forensic technicians finally restored part of a fingerprint on a metal bar found at the distillery. The print matched 92% with a fingerprint from Tao-juk Kwan's medical records. Though the print was faint and had a high margin of error, it was enough to reinforce suspicions. The Special Investigation Unit immediately issued a nationwide arrest warrant for Tao-juk Kwan, officially identifying him as the primary suspect in multiple murders. Notices were sent to police departments in neighboring provinces, requesting high-level coordination. On May 5th, rumors spread in communities along the mountain's edge about a serial killer who gouged out eyes hiding in the area, sparking fear among residents. To avoid panic, the police quietly increased patrols without disclosing details. They discreetly coordinated with village leaders, advising locals to lock their doors securely and avoid going out late at night. All developments remained focused on the manhunt for Tao-juk Kwan. On May 6, an incident occurred. The owner of a small pig farm reported the loss of a 60-kilogram sow. The pen had been pried open overnight, with blood spilled everywhere. The slaughter was performed professionally, with only the best cuts, taken bones and skin were discarded. The footprints around the scene were blurred by rain, but the shoe size was estimated to be around 42. It was highly likely that Tao-juk Kwan was responsible, as the method resembled the earlier goat killing. Once again, police conducted a full-day sweep and failed to find him. Luke Trio Kwan pushed the team to tighten the perimeter, noting that such a large-scale slaughter showed the suspect was taking more risks than before. On May 8, to prevent the suspect from fleeing to another province, the Ha-Bak, Son-Thai, and Ha-Nam, police departments continued to exchange data and added another layer of vehicle checks. Bus stations and train stations were ordered to be on alert for a thin man in his 30s, possibly bearing injuries from his time on the run. Still, no one matching the description was reported. His extended disappearance led many to believe that he was still clinging to the forest or hiding in abandoned structures. On May 9, two plainclothes police officers visited a partially constructed building after receiving reports of a stranger entering late at night. They turned off their lights and quietly moved inside. A few old cement bags and scattered debris were present, but no one was in sight. However, an instant noodle package torn open at one corner with clear teeth marks lay in the corner. When they shined their flashlight, they realized the place could have served as a temporary shelter, but the suspect had already left. From then on, similar deserted spots were closely monitored. On May 10th, a scout checked a small convenience store known for selling cheap cigarettes. The owner remembered a filthy-looking man with a hoarse voice stopping by early in the morning, buying 2 packs before quickly disappearing. This occurred around 5 a.m. when it was still dark. The man had headed toward a stream. Police gave chase immediately, but it was too late. His footprints had mixed with those of market-goers, and another opportunity for direct contact was missed. On May 11th, heavy rain washed away many tracks in the forest. District police took the chance to re-inspect makeshift shelters on farms. They found one hut with its door wide open and leftover food scattered inside. Damp and moldy, a clear sign someone had recently stayed there. Further searching revealed pig bones. There was no doubt the suspect had stayed there for several days before leaving ahead of the rain. On May 12th, Hongduong Commune, police reported that a farmer had heard a noise at night and saw a shadowy figure attempting to steal a dairy cow. When the farmer shouted, the man immediately released the cow, threatened with a knife, and fled. The details of the weapon and his build perfectly matched Tao Juk Kwan. This time, police arrived at a scene only about 4 kilometers from the old distillery. It seemed the suspect was circling back to familiar areas, though whether it was intentional or coincidence remained unclear. On May 13, Luke Trio Kwan and his subordinates considered the possibility that Tao Juk Kwan was trying to return to the distillery to destroy evidence or retrieve something. They set up a discreet perimeter around the site, posting hidden guards and waiting for nightfall. Nothing happened that evening, and no one appeared by early morning. Like a ghost, he moved without a pattern. The team had to withdraw and assign rotating watch duty. On May 14th, DNA test results from a strand of the suspect's hair found at the distillery showed a 90% match with samples collected from Tao Juk Kwan's relatives. This nearly confirmed he had been at the scene, but the case could not be closed without his capture. The Confidential Records Unit agreed to issue a nationwide red notice. Though not made public to civilians, it was circulated among police departments in all provinces. On May 15th, a scout received a tip about a strange man bathing shirtless by a stream. By the time they arrived, he was gone, leaving only soap residue. A broken piece of mirror with a wet fingerprint was recovered nearby. Forensics quickly collected the sample. The partial palm print showed finger proportions matching Tao Juk Kwan's. Another day passed, and the stranger had again vanished into the hills. On May 18th, the task force moved under the cover of night, attempting a surprise operation. A group of scouts lay in ambush at a forested area near Tin Lam Commune, where thefts were common, waiting for any sound. Around midnight, they spotted a faint flashlight in the distance. 2 officers crept forward, but the light suddenly went out, plunging everything into darkness. They pushed through bushes, but found no one, only a discarded sack filled with empty milk cartons and biscuits. It seemed the suspect sensed danger and fled before being surrounded. On May 20th, ongoing meetings took place between Bac Nam District Police, Ha Bac Province Police, and Sun Tai Province Police. A plan to tightly seal the borders and block all provincial escape routes had been in effect for 2 weeks but produced no results. It was believed Tao Juk Kwan was still hiding nearby, waiting for a chance. Some scouts were exhausted, but Luke Trio Kwan refused to let them pause. He believed that as soon as the suspect made a small mistake, he would be captured. On May 25th, the word came that the suspect had just hitched a ride on someone's motorcycle over a mountain pass. The driver described the man as barely speaking, giving a few small bills as payment, then dashing into a trail after getting off. The man hadn't given his name, but the driver recalled he was thin, with a worn backpack and a dark jacket. Though his face wasn't clearly seen, the driver swore the man's voice was low, hoarse, and emitted a strange aura. On May 28, the Confidential Records Unit shifted tactics again, deciding to recheck every abandoned house on the eastern slopes areas often overlooked. A police team entered an unfinished house, dark and still missing parts of its outer walls. Inside, they smelled rotting meat and discovered a half-butchered chicken carcass. The suspect was nowhere to be found. He had probably left earlier that day. A bloodstain trailed from the floor to the window, then vanished into thick bushes. The team leader documented everything and maintained surveillance for several more days. On May 30th, 2 undercover scouts patrolled the agricultural market, watching for anyone making suspicious bulk food purchases. They noticed a man with greasy hair in a grey coat buying lots of dried fish and instant noodles. When approached, the man turned and slipped out of the market, speeding off on an old bicycle. Police gave chase, but he veered onto a shortcut and disappeared. Another lost chance. Clearly, Tao Juk Kwan was extremely alert, always scanning his surroundings before taking action. By October 2009, after many months of blockades, the police still had not captured Tao Juk Kwan. They suspected he might have escaped the mountains and moved to remote border areas or distant provinces. However, a farmer from Duongfeng commune suddenly reported seeing someone resembling the suspect loitering near an empty field in early October. Police quickly verified the report, but when they arrived, only footprints were left in the dry mud. Another tip came in. A stranger suspected of stealing chickens in Markau village, nearly 30 kilometers from the distillery. Villagers rushed to catch him, but he ran away, dropping a live chicken. The whole group chased him and nearly caught up, but he vaulted over a fence and disappeared into a sugarcane field. The description was of a thin man, patchy beard, over 30 years old. The Backnam District Police came to investigate and saw a trail of chicken blood along the path, stopping near a dry canal. From this, they inferred that Tao Duk Kwan was still lurking nearby and dared not stray far from Habak province for fear of being caught in the more populated urban areas. In mid-October, the district police, in coordination with the communes, launched another large-scale forest sweep. This time, they split into multiple teams, advancing simultaneously and equipped with more modern communication gear. They hoped to form a tight encirclement, pushing the suspect toward a direction where units were already lying in wait. The pursuit team moved for 3 days, inspecting every bush and cave, but found no one matching the description. Only some food wrappers and old shoes remained. Some detectives guessed that Tao Duk Kwan had sensed something and fled the area before the operation began. By late October, an anonymous man reported that someone came to his house asking to buy an old coat resembling the wanted poster of Tao Duk Kwan. It was dusk, and the man didn't let anyone get a clear look at his face, just paid and left immediately. The homeowner suspected something but didn't dare shout. Police immediately swept the area but no suspicious individual was found. Every time he appeared, it was only for a few minutes, always one step ahead of the pursuit. On November 1st, 2009, cold air swept in, and forest nights became freezing. Many believed Tao Duk Kwan couldn't survive long in such harsh conditions. The Confidential Records Unit hoped he would be forced to come out into residential areas more frequently, increasing the chance of exposure. They continued to hold meetings, reinforced their teams, and planned ambushes at warm places like livestock farms and warehouses, thinking the suspect might sneak in to find heating or food. On November 5th, an industrial chicken farm owner reported losing 20 chickens in one night. The back door showed signs of forced entry, with chicken blood scattered toward a corner of the wall. Police rushed to the scene and followed the blood trail through a vacant lot before it disappeared. Same story again. The thief vanished into darkness, uncaught. However, the boldness of the actions indicated increasing recklessness. On November 8th, a scout team heard about strange light at an abandoned house by the forest. They silently surrounded it from 3 directions and shone flashlights suddenly. Inside were a few burned wood pieces, the warmth still lingering, and size 42 footprints in the damp ground. Whoever was there had just escaped through the back door, leaving no fingerprints or documents. Outside the window, 2 branches had been snapped to create a passage. Following that direction, police chased to the forest edge but lost track by dawn. On November 11th, Luc Trieuquan sent 4 seasoned scouts to form a mobile hunting team, constantly changing locations to maintain surprise. They stayed with locals, blended in, investigated during the day, and set ambushes at night. After a week, they still hadn't encountered the suspect. Minor thefts continued, but the culprit always evaded capture quickly. On November 15th, a household discovered their storage shed broken into, with a kerosene can, some soap, and 2 sets of old clothes missing. They also noticed a pig's liver left in a basin had vanished. Clearly, the suspect was still maintaining basic survival by stealing food and supplies. Though no one had been harmed, the risk of him becoming violent under pressure was growing. Police urged families in surrounding areas to stay alert, avoid direct confrontation, and report any suspicious individuals immediately. On November 18th, forensic analysis confirmed that fingerprints found on a matchbox in an abandoned house matched approximately 85% with Tao Duc Quan's. Due to the rough surface of the matchbox, it was hard to preserve full prints, but the match was strong enough to support the theory that he had used it. The information was reported to Luc Trieuquan. The suspect had not fled far and was likely still hiding in Bac Nam district and nearby. Everyone raised their guard, preparing for the next search. On November 20th, a scout group surrounded a wooden hut on a hillside from which smoke was rising. As they approached, they saw the smoke coming from a makeshift chimney. The door was bolted. After calling out without a reply, they decided to storm in. As the door flew open, thick smoke engulfed the area with a strong smell. In a corner, a small fire was burning, but no person was in sight, only a pot of boiling bone soup. On the wooden wall were some random knife-scratched characters. The whole team searched the surrounding area and found shoe prints leading down the forest slope. They followed, but it was futile. On November 25th, the Confidential Records Unit received a report from a family at the edge of Hongduong Commune. They noticed their back door had been tampered with, and a hot pot of rice was missing, along with 2 freshly butchered chickens. The intruder left a piece of student notebook paper with illegible scribbles resembling an eye drawing. The tech team photographed it for analysis. It was likely Tao Duc Quan left the symbol on purpose, but no one could interpret the meaning. Perhaps he meant to mock or warn. Everyone tightened security. On November 26th, another family in the commune reported seeing a stranger peering through their window at S.o.a.k.i.ng. The homeowner shouted, and the man fled, leaving a muddy footprint matching shoe size 42. Police dogs picked up the scent but soon wandered aimlessly. It seemed he had used odor-masking substances. After months in hiding, he had become extremely skilled in evasion. On November 28th, a new development occurred. A 14-year-old boy on his way to school early in the morning encountered a skinny, bearded man in ragged clothes. The man asked the boy for food. Terrified, the boy threw him a bag of snacks and ran away. The man didn't chase. When the police spoke to the boy, he described the man as dazed-looking, unarmed. From the description, it was likely Tao Duc Quan. The sighting was near a dirt path at the forest's edge in Tin Lam Commune. That area was again placed under tight surveillance. On November 29, scouts questioned locals, but no one had seen the stranger. Only someone said they heard hurried footsteps the night before. The Confidential Records Unit decided to set up a large-scale operation, coordinating 20 more militia to establish watch points around the forest perimeter, hoping that the suspect would emerge at night looking for food. Many teams waited through the night under falling snow, but saw no one. On the morning of November 30th, 2 scouts returned to a trail and discovered fresh footprints in the snow. They immediately followed them. The tracks extended over 200 meters, ending at an open clearing. It seemed the suspect realized he was leaving a trail and veered towards slippery rocks to avoid leaving prints. Once again, the search ended in a dead end. At the end of November, Luke Trio Quan deployed another team to block all roads leading into Dien Trang village, suspecting that Tao Du Quan might return to the old crime scene to take care of unfinished business. They also sealed off the distillery, installed floodlights at the entrance, and fenced it off with metal sheets. Anyone approaching would be instantly visible. Dozens of days passed, and still, he didn't show. On December 15, 2009, a cold gust swept through the mountain bordering Bac Nam district. At 7:00 a.m., Luke Trio Quan received an urgent call from a local police team. They had discovered a suspicious site, possibly connected to Tao Du Quan, in an abandoned house deep in the forest. Some hunters passing by saw smoke rising from behind the ruined kitchen and approached. They found food cooking, but no one inside. The house stood isolated on a hillside, with a narrow trail choked by overgrown weeds leading in. Luke Trio Quan assigned 2 reconnaissance units to approach quickly from the district center. They used off-road vehicles, taking nearly 2 hours to reach the foot of the mountain, then walked another half-hour to the site. The recon team stood behind large rocks, quietly observing the house, which now only had its wall frame remaining. The tile roof had partially collapsed. The front wooden door was rotten. The smoke had dissipated, but footprints and trampled grass were clearly visible on the ground around it. Lieutenant Ma Luong led 4 men to approach from the side, avoiding the main path. 2 other officers circled to check the back door. Inside was silent. Ma Luong quietly approached the broken window, shining his flashlight. The kitchen area was blackened with smoke, still smelled of oil and grease, with bones and half-eaten vegetables scattered on the floor. He signaled to his team to prepare. They gently pushed the front door, which creaked open, but no one was there. The recon unit searched the kitchen area where smoke had been seen earlier. Beside a pile of smoldering firewood was a rusty pan. Inside, still some food not yet cooked. In the center of the kitchen floor lay a pair of torn sandals. Upon close inspection, they were size 42 worn-out straps caked with mud. An officer wrapped them in an evidence bag and continued the search. To the left of the kitchen was a small door leading to a makeshift bedroom. Inside was pitch dark and smelled damp. Everyone stayed alert, ready in case the suspect was hiding. When they turned on their flashlights, they saw a worn-out mattress against the wall, scattered with moldy bread wrappers. The wall had dark, stained patches, unclear if water or something else. In the corner stood a rusty metal bar, similar to the type used in distilleries to fix barrels. All signs pointed to someone recently staying there temporarily, possibly returning at any moment. Luke Trio Quan received the report via radio and immediately ordered, "Keep the scene intact. Guard the perimeter. The suspect might still be nearby. Do not let him escape." He formed an intercept unit to circle around the narrow back path, dense with bushes. They positioned scouts in an old watch hut, aiming binoculars toward the house. Another group spread out further, ready to block any escape. Around 9:30 a.m., a shadowy figure appeared at the forest edge nearby. The officer at the hut gently blew a signal whistle, and all recon teams readied themselves. The figure moved slowly, weaving through the grass, cautiously approaching the house. He wore dark clothes, carried a heavy backpack, and held something resembling a long knife. He was about 80 meters away, the dim light making facial identification difficult. As he advanced several dozen meters, Luke Trio Quan radioed 2 teams to circle and cut off retreat paths. The left team moved along a rocky ridge while the right silently closed in. When the suspect was just 15 meters from the house, an officer flashed a light straight at him and shouted, "Freeze instantly!" The man turned sharply, startled, and saw police closing in from all sides. He tore through the fence, growled under his breath, and ran back toward the forest. The nearest team chased immediately. He slashed wildly, forcing them to step back. Luke Trio Quan yelled, "Drop the knife, you can't escape." The man looked around and realized he was surrounded. He was only a few meters from the officers. He recklessly swung the knife, trying to cut a way out. An officer used a rubber baton to knock the blade aside. The man staggered but managed to stay upright. Lieutenant Ma Luong lunged, swung the baton across the suspect's arm. The knife dropped. Still struggling, the man shoved the baton away, trying to flee again. 3 more officers tackled and pinned him down, restraining his limbs. He lay face down. For a moment, he thrashed violently, growling hoarsely, but exhausted. He couldn't resist. They cuffed him, pulled him up. As his face became visible, they confirmed it was Tao Duc Quan, 37 years old, scruffy stubble, long greasy hair down to his neck, pale skin. He panted, eyes dazed. Luc Trio Quan signaled to check the backpack. Inside were a small dissection knife set, a blood-stained towel, some instant noodles, old clothes, and miscellaneous items. There was also a locked rectangular wooden box. They forced him to open it. He turned away. Lieutenant Ma Luong pried the lid open. Inside was a plastic bag containing over a dozen dried round objects resembling eyeballs and some torn cloth fragments. Everyone shuddered at the sight. After restraining him tightly, the recon team escorted the man out of the forest and transported him to Bac Nam District Police Headquarters. The journey had to be split into 2 vehicles. In the car, the suspect remained silent, eyes darting. Luc Trio Quan sat next to him, watching closely, fearing the suspect might attempt to grab a weapon or harm himself. The bumpy ride lasted nearly an hour. Upon arrival, they moved the man into a special interrogation room. The questioning began at 11:45 a.m. 2 investigators, a clerk, and Luc Trio Quan sat across from him. At first, he lowered his head, silent like a statue. When asked his name and age, he answered curtly, his voice hoarse. Luc Trio Quan asked clearly, "Your name is Tao Duc Quan, born in 1972, correct?" He squinted, nodded slightly. Continuing, "Do you confess to murdering 13 girls at the liquor distillery?" He gave a faint, cold smile but said nothing. When one investigator mentioned the eyes and victim's underwear found in his possession, he looked up and smirked. He began to mumble, his voice fragmented. After repeated pressing, he finally admitted to luring the girls to the distillery, killing them, removing their eyes, and submerging their bodies in barrels. In some cases, he lured them with job offers. In others, he used a knife to intimidate. He gave short descriptions, with a twisted sense of pride. One investigator asked, "Why did you do it?" Tao Duc Quan chuckled hoarsely. Muttering incoherent things about eternal beauty he wanted to preserve, that eyes were the essence worth collecting, and that soaking the bodies in liquor helped retain the scent of youth. His grotesque explanations gave everyone chills. Luc Trio Quan observed his face, detecting signs of mania. I approached them in many ways. He began his confession, tilting his face upward slightly, voice gravelly. At first, I targeted girls who returned from work late or were wandering, looking for jobs near the industrial zone. Sometimes, I walked around boarding houses, pretending to be a labor recruiter. Other times, I chose deserted roads, waiting in ambush at night. In the dark, just having a knife was enough to control them. They panicked, unable to cry out. After subduing them, I forced the victims onto a motorbike or made them follow me to a location I had prepared. The abandoned liquor distillery was my chosen place because it was large, gloomy, and far from residential areas. I had stolen the back door key from a pile of old factory items. I unlocked the side entrance and led them into the darkness. Large wooden barrels still remained, mostly empty, reeking of fermented liquor. At first, I worried they might fight back, but nearly all were too terrified, just trembling. I tied their hands with rope, binding tightly around the wrists, then looping around their ankles. Sometimes I dragged them against the wall to better restrain them. Some cried and begged for their lives. I ignored them. Usually, I used duct tape or old rags to gag them so they couldn't scream. At the beginning, I was clumsy. The first victim took me great effort to tie up. In my fumbling, I dropped my knife and had to use an old iron bar. When she struggled, I struck her shoulder with the bar, and she collapsed, unable to scream. I dragged her to a corner of the distillery, waiting for her to faint from fear. Then I cut her clothing, taking all her underwear. They always begged me not to kill them, but my goal was their eyes and the thrill of total control. To make things easier, I usually immobilized them, at least ensured they couldn't scream. Once, I punched a girl in the temple until she passed out. Then I tied her to a metal post in the distillery. Each facility had an exposed steel frame. I used the post base to secure the rope so they couldn't move or escape. Then I wrapped a cloth over their eyes and wrapped them, both blinding and silencing them. Some were nearly catatonic, frozen or shaking violently. In those moments, I relished watching their despair. Then I took the knife, a pointed, thin blade used for skinning. I once worked at a slaughterhouse, learned how to extract pig and cow eyes. When I unsheathed the knife, they couldn't resist because of the restraints. But some, terrified, thrashed violently, muffled cries behind the gag. I approached, pinned their shoulders, secured their head. The sharp blade slid around the eye socket. I sliced open the eyelid delicately, avoiding dirt or splatter. With every incision, warmth and fluid seeped out. Many fell into a stupor, some fainted midway. In some cases, the victim didn't die instantly. They cried in agony, blood pouring. I didn't care because my objective was to retrieve intact eyeballs. This required care to preserve shape. I made mistakes early on, but learned. I pressed the blade, gently separating tissue, grasped the eyeball, slid through the optic nerve, and finally extracted it. That part was hardest. If I slipped, the eye would rupture, rendering it worthless. One victim's eye burst, blood spraying, her body spasming. I had to finish her quickly by blocking her nose and strangling her until she stopped moving. After taking the eyes, I placed them in a small alcohol jar or prepared plastic bag. Over time, I improved, putting the eyes in old liquor jars, hoping to preserve them longer. Then I checked if the victim was still breathing. If so, I strangled or bludgeoned her until she stopped moving. In the dark distillery, lit only by an oil lamp and a small flashlight, I wasted no sympathy. Each girl was just material for my collection. Once dead, I cut the ropes, dragged the body near the row of wooden barrels. 13 barrels remained, once used for fruit-infused liquor, abandoned after the distillery owner died. Some barrels were large, some small. I placed the bodies accordingly. Before that, I mixed diluted liquor with leftover fermenting ingredients to submerge over half the body. I believed this would preserve the corpses, slow the stench. If decomposition began, I added chemicals found in the warehouse or sealed the lid tightly. Each barrel held one body. I marked the barrels with chalk or marker, usually. I wrote small numbers on the edges for tracking. Early on, I arranged the clothing neatly before laying them in, but soon I got used to just tossing them in. Before sealing the lid, I always stripped their underwear, keeping it as a souvenir. That was my second collection beside the eyes. Each girl had different colors and sizes. I kept them in separate bags, noted the date, and stored them in a hidden corner. The barrels gradually filled up. I thought of disposing old bodies, but the plan was foiled. Around the end of 2008, I considered finding another place to continue, but the distillery remained safe and rarely visited, so I added hooks to the barrel lids to prevent curiosity. When the last girl I brought in, probably around December, she was about 18. After finishing with her, I placed her in a barrel, not yet marked carefully. I disliked noise. Each time, I worked late at night, eliminating all external light. The walls were old, rain leaked, wind howled. But no one dared enter due to ghost rumors. Once or twice, I heard footsteps, probably passers-by. I held my breath, waited until they left before continuing. All through 2008, no one suspected. Apart from a few times I saw figures near the gate. Extracting eyes gave me the most satisfaction. Many nights I sat examining each jar, watching the pupils turn white or change color. I imagined them as artworks. In my mind, each eye had unique charm containing youth's fragrance. I even rubbed my hands, sniffed the mix of alcohol and liquor, considering it a form of appreciation. These things drove me to keep finding new victims. When asked if I felt cruel, I didn't care. My sole aim was to preserve the eyes. Whether they lived or died meant nothing to me. They were tools. Back at the distillery, I often brushed my hand over eyelids, imagining slicing and dissecting. That sensation made my heart race. Thus, when I completed all 13 barrels, 1 girl per barrel, I thought I had reached the peak of confidential records. That's why I deliberately maintained the liquor environment. It both masked the smell and satisfied my inspiration. I only regret not having had the chance to rotate care for them before being discovered. Regardless, I managed to store quite a few toy pieces made from eyes, which I had hidden in jars I carried while fleeing, intending to admire them later. That's all. I did everything myself. This has nothing to do with Liu Kwong. That guy only happened to be previously connected to the factory. I conveniently used his notebook to write random things to throw the police off track. I cooked and lived in hiding right in the factory, except on days I went out to find new victims. If I hadn't been discovered, I would have continued collecting more eyes. When asked about the timeline of the crimes, Tao Duquan confirmed he started around the beginning of 2008 and stopped when the factory was discovered by locals on January 10, 2009. After his statement, he stopped talking, looked up at Luke Trio-Kwan and asked softly, "So what are you going to do now?" The team leader calmly replied, "You killed 13 people. The punishment for such a crime will not be light." He clenched his jaw, his eyes bloodshot, lowered his face, and said no more. After the interrogation session, the investigation team had all necessary testimonies, audio recordings, video footage, and physical evidence matching every detail of the case. Over the next 2 days, officers continuously questioned him to clarify any missing elements. He admitted to buying many surgical knives on the black market, hiding them in a backpack. Whenever he saw a girl who met his standards, he would either abduct or lure her to the factory. Over time, he began to believe his creations were dramatic enough to become immortal. His deranged words did not mask his savage nature. In his youth, he once had an accident and witnessed the dissection of an animal's eye, which twisted his mind. The image of an eyeball being cut out haunted him, sparking a strange obsession. Gradually, he began to believe eyes were the window to the soul and wanted to possess them to preserve eternal beauty. At the same time, he developed a desire to steal his victim's underwear, a final symbol of privacy and vulnerability. This piling obsession erased all moral boundaries, turning him step by step into a perverted murderer. All witnesses, evidence, fingerprints, and his confession pointed to one conclusion. Tao Duquan was the killer of the 13 girls whose eyes were gouged out and whose bodies were soaked in liquor barrels. On the night of December 17, 2009, Bac Nam District Police issued an internal bulletin confirming his arrest and stating he could no longer escape. He was escorted to the detention center. On December 20, 2009, the investigation team submitted a detailed final report, completing all files and transferring them to higher authorities. The report confirmed Tao Duquan's responsibility for 13 deaths, along with numerous inhumane acts. A forensic psychiatric evaluation confirmed he was mentally sound and fully responsible for his actions. After completing the necessary procedures, the police issued a decision for strict legal prosecution, citing heinous crimes, organized murder, and organ theft. The maximum penalty was death. This process followed the framework of criminal proceedings without the need for an elaborate public trial. The special procedure still confirmed that the death sentence was irreversible. In prison, Tao Duquan initially acted indifferent. But after realizing the severity of his punishment, he showed signs of despair and lost his aggressive demeanor. During the final interrogation, Luke Trio-Kwan personally attended. He told him, "You must pay the price for what you've done. You've crossed every line." Upon hearing this, he gave no reaction, his gaze hollow, lips quivering. Before being transferred to carry out the sentence, Tao Duc Quan was returned a few personal belongings. He said nothing more and didn't ask anyone for help. Escorting officers later said when being taken out of the detention center, he lowered his head, walking heavily, offering no resistance. The signed verdict clearly stated that the criminal acts were especially serious, causing widespread public panic and deserving the highest penalty. The entire case closed with a death sentence carried out in 2010. The local authorities carried out all necessary procedures at the beginning of the following year. This sentence was deemed appropriate, putting an end to all controversy. 9 long months of tracing leads, countless searches in the forest, dozens of theft and assault cases all finally led to this conclusion. Luc Quan handed over the case file to his superiors and cleaned up the aftermath. A few days later, he returned to the district headquarters, where the criminal team removed the wanted poster featuring Tao Duc Quan. A young investigator said aloud. In the end, he ran out of ways to escape. So, today's case has come to an end. See you again in the next investigation here on the Confidential Records channel.